So there's a topic that's come up. I wish I had an Oilers hat that fit properly, but I don't. So I'm gonna be sacrilegious here and on Florida with Edmonton jersey. Um, so last night, uh, Jeff Merrick, Colby Armstrong, and Ryan Whitney had some fun about the Ryan Smyth crying when he got traded from the Oilers. And of course, there's the backlash that's taken place. I've said in other videos before, I know players have a go at one another, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't. And this instance doesn't bother me either, but I figured, you know what, I might as well get some perspective in on this, because for younger fans, they may not realize that the year that Ryan got traded, um, it was a rough one for the Oilers. The Oilers had been in the Stanley Cup final in 2006, and by the time the 07-08 season started. Ow, you scratched me, bugger. By the time the 07-08 season started, it had all fallen apart. So let's get some perspective on this. Uh, how low can the Oilers go? This is going into the 07-08 season. It was one chaotic year for Oilers GM Kevin Lowe following their Stanley Cup run of 06. He was forced to trade franchise defenseman Chris Pronger after only 1 year and was unable to replace him throughout 06-07. The Oil also traded away the face of the franchise, left wing Ryan Smyth, at the trading deadline, and then watched as Smyth returned to the Northwest Division with Colorado over the summer. Lowe thought he had acquired UFA center Michael Nylander, that's Woolie's dad, but the latter chose Washington at the 11th hour. Desperate, Lowe then attempted to pluck Thomas Vanek away from Buffalo with an offer sheet, but was rebuffed, and that's a contract that Buffalo sat under for quite a while. And the offseason moves the Oilers made that year, he brought in Joni Pitkanen to try to fix the blue line, Matthew Guerin for a backup, and Jeff Sanderson to help with offense up front. Needless to say, that didn't really work. Now, the big joke of the press conference told last night was, I'm trying to remember if it was, it doesn't matter if it was Armstrong or Whitney, but one or the other said that, well, it's not like the Islanders were going to win the Cup that year anyways, because Ryan Smyth said, my intention is to win a Stanley Cup and bring it back here to Edmonton. The New York Islanders were outside the playoffs at the time Smyth got there. Famously, on the last day of the year, they got into the Stanley Cup playoffs. Ryan Smyth definitely helped get them there, and I believe it was the Leafs that they eliminated on that final day of the year. I believe it was Toronto that had occupied that spot and got pushed out by New York. And I don't need to look at a magazine to remember that. I have brain here. Either them or Florida. Anyways, I'm pretty sure it was Toronto. I remember cheering because Wade Dublowicz was the goaltender at the time. Rick DiPietro was hurt, and I became a huge fan of Dublowicz. They lost in the first round. The way this magazine tells it is maybe if Rick DiPietro hadn't been hurt, maybe the Islanders would have pulled off an upset over Buffalo in round one. False. I think Dublowicz was a fine goaltender, and I don't think Rick DiPietro would have helped. But Ryan Smyth did. Ryan Smyth was a guy who wore his heart on his sleeve, as shown by the famous press conference where he was crying. Now, the idea that when he went to Colorado that fall, that the other team might have been mocking him for things he said at that press conference where he was crying almost the entire time. It doesn't surprise me. In terms of machismo, the NHL's up there. It's up there with the NFL for the whole machismo, boys don't cry kind of idea. But I also think people are really overreacting. And I take exception to the shots. Somebody posted on Twitter, Colby Armstrong never stuck around long enough in one city for anybody to care when he was gone. Colby Armstrong was a good player. He wasn't great. He wasn't a star in any terms, but he was a good NHLer. And the idea that Ryan Smyth gets revered and Colby Armstrong gets slammed is odd, because Colby Armstrong's career wasn't as long as it could have been due to a number of issues, but he was still an NHL player, and he was a good NHL player. He wasn't a bad NHL player. Ryan Whitney, much the same thing. I don't think Ryan Smyth would have been offended by their conversation. I think if Ryan Smyth had been sitting on that panel, I think he would have been laughing along with Merrick and the boys. This is where that whole, and I hate the term, but it's out there now. That's that whole snowflake term comes out. The idea that if you say something, people will immediately get offended and go nuts. It's that whole snowflake thing, and it works on both sides. The idea that only liberals, only conservatives, no, it's on both sides. So whether I might say something offensive that everybody on my channel goes, "How dare you," or it's something that's said by guys who used to be in the NHL that other people get upset about. And I, to my knowledge, none of the tweets that came out against um, Armstrong and Whitney came from former NHLers. The funny thing too is that Colby Armstrong with Atlanta said the entire bench did it. And there's a joke in there about Atlanta. Certainly, that's fair. The idea that the Atlanta Thrashers would be mocking anybody from any organization is pretty funny. But I really, honestly, I don't think this is a major thing. And I think this is one of the parts where social media and even the media venue that I use here with YouTube, it just makes it too easy to attack people without considering the source material. Um, I think the concept of, well, it's not like the Islanders are going to win the cup that year anyways. True, that's fair. They did make the playoffs after they got Ryan Smyth, and the Oilers missed the playoffs without Ryan Smyth. They weren't going to make the playoffs with Smyth either. Ryan Smyth was one of those guys that I liked him, and I always thought he was a heart and soul glue guy, but I never understood the way people romanticized his offense. I never thought his offense was that impressive. Again, that's an opinion. I don't want anybody to get offended. See how that works? It's that easy. But it's one of those things that I think is ridiculous. Just ridiculous. I think that in terms of the way Twitter works and other venues work, I think sometimes the fans have too much say and too much of a voice. And I think that's definitely the case with politics. It's definitely the case with a lot of things where people who probably shouldn't have a seat at the table end up having one. And for me, the video that I'm doing now is more of a, let's put it in perspective. Ryan Smyth, when he was traded to the Islanders, he was prepared to give his heart and soul to the Islanders. The problem was the Islanders, a budget team, often lowballed players, and Smyth got a sweet deal from Colorado. And Colorado at the time, let's just go ahead and take a look at him in Colorado, because that I remember at the time people were like, "Oh yeah, he's so loyal. He spent all of 2 weeks in New York." But Colorado, when they traded for him, they were still a playoff team. After 11 consecutive postseason, one could forgive tumble down the standings. Unfortunately, playing the toughest division in the NHL finally caught up with Colorado as they stumbled out of the gate early and couldn't make up the difference in the Northwest Division. So this was the first year that Colorado missed the playoffs, but there was a perception that they could still build up and get back to it. This was a team that Joe Sakic was still on. I think this was when he was breaking down, though. No. He had 100 points that year. So he was joining a team with Joe Sakic scoring 100 points. Peter Stastny was second-line center. He had 78 points. Smyth was the first-line left winger. Wojtek Volsky was second line. They actually thought Yaroslav Holinka was going to make a difference. They signed him out of Europe. This is why I don't take a whole lot of stock in European players. Brad Richardson's there on their fourth line on this chart. Milan Hajduk was on the first line. Hajduk was at his height. He had 35 goals and 70 points that year, and he was 31. So he made the right call in going to Colorado, because the Islanders were, and still pretty much are, a floundering organization. It's not long after they let Smyth walk because they couldn't afford to keep him that they ended up drafting Tavares. It wasn't a plan, it was the mass exodus under Gar Snow. And it's one of those things that happened. So in terms of looking at the Ryan Smyth deal now, looking at it 10 years later, and more importantly, looking at that press conference, you got to understand he put his heart and soul for a decade into the Edmonton Oilers. He was a top draft pick of the Oilers. The fans loved him. He loved being there. So the idea that he'd be crying at his press conference, totally forgivable. I don't know anybody at the time that I know that was mocking him for it, but I'm sure there were people that did. And in general, people need to just relax. Just relax just a little bit. Don't take it so seriously. There's people taking this way too seriously. Um, and other people not taking it seriously enough. Like on the one hand, you got people who are going to say, oh, yeah, we'll mock Ryan Smyth, or how dare you mock Ryan Smyth? And then on the other hand, people who say, well, Ottawa's stupid for signing Burrows. Which one is it? Because if Smyth being upset at being traded is valid, then Ottawa deciding to take care of Burrows isn't. Because the Islanders didn't really do anything to take care of Smyth when he got there either. They basically couldn't. They didn't have the money. So, anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you haven't seen Sportsnet mocking Smyth's press conference, I'll include it in the comments section, or in the description for the video. But I don't think I really don't think it's a big deal. All right, but you're welcome to disagree with me, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Thank you very much.